Okay, hello everybody over there. I have the honor to present the next lecture with the conference called Situating plus Doing Digital Methods. But first, some words about his CV. Richard Rogers is the author of Digital Methods, MIT Press, 2013, which won ICA's Outstanding Book Award in 2014. He's also the author of The End of the Virtual, Amsterdam University Press, 2009. He's also the author of Information Politics on the Web, MIT Press, 2004. And most recently, he's the author of Doing Digital Methods, SAGE, 2019. He is also a professor in digital culture and director of the Digital Methods Initiative, Media Studies, University of Amsterdam, DMI. DMI is one of the leading research groups within Internet studies and specializes in designing methods and tools for repurposing online devices and platforms for research into social and political issues as well as media critique. The MI toolbox includes, among other things, software that can extract and crawl URLs from different sources, extract datasets from Facebook, capture tweets, extract data from YouTube, compare images across language versions of Wikipedia, and scrape 4chan and Telegram. By the way, DMA holds annual winter and summer schools. People interested, maybe you will be interested after the conference. People interested in digital methods could attend one of them. Okay, now in Spanish. Bueno, Richard Rogers es el autor de 4 libros fundamentalmente, Digital Methods en el MIT, que recibió un prestigioso premio de la Asociación Internacional de Comunicación. Es autor también de The End of the Virtual, publicado por Amsterdam University Press en el 2009. Es autor de Information Politics on the Web, publicado en el MIT. Y recientemente es el autor de Doing Digital Methods, sobre el cual va la conferencia a la que vamos a asistir actualmente. Bueno, él es profesor de cultura digital y es el director de Digital Methods Initiative, del DMI, que por cierto, bueno, pues me ha animado a que os comunique que anualmente pues convoca cursos de verano e invierno sobre estos temas que vamos a tratar en la conferencia, ¿no? El DMI aporta pues herramientas como pueden ser software que puedes traer y analizar URLs desde diferentes fuentes, puedes traer datos de Facebook, capturar tweets, puedes traer datos de YouTube, comparar imágenes de las distintas versiones lingüísticas de Wikipedia y analizar en concreto 4chan y Telegram. Okay, then Richard, all yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for the kind invitation. I'm happy to be with you all today. What I'm going to do is, today is in the course of about an hour, I'm going to first situate digital methods in the sort of bit historically in terms of internet-related research. And subsequently, I'm going to compare digital methods or kind of situate digital methods epistemologically. So what similarities does it have to digital humanities and digital social sciences, and how is it distinctive? And finally, I'm going to take you through some digital methods more practically. And I'll talk about the major social media platforms today. So I'll talk about using digital methods to study Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. I will also be happy to take questions at the end. So digital methods is something that we in Amsterdam sort of kind of coined sometime in 2008. And it was a notion that took advantage of a different way of studying the web. So originally, the web was studied as a kind of virtual space, as distinct from the real, and it was also a space of imagination and projection. It promised new politics, new identities, new bodies, etc. These were the days of cyber studies. Now, I think right around 1999, 2000, the social scientists, and particularly the ethnographers, arrived, and they, in some sense, grounded the web. So it was no longer this this virtual space, but rather it was a space that was very, very much part of the real. And they coined terms like digital divide and things like this. And what was interesting about that period methodologically is you would go online in order to study the online. So you would travel to cyber cafes, you would do interviews, etc. Now, sometime around 2007, 2008, I, in a book published Amsterdam University Press, pronounced the end of the virtual. So this idea of that the web is in fact a data set which you can use in order to study what's happening in society and in culture. And here the idea was we use web data, so we go online to study both the online as well as the offline simultaneously. And one of the more interesting questions that we posed is that can you use web data to make findings about society and culture without grounding those findings in the offline? So the question is, under which conditions and when is it beneficial to use the online as a basis? Now, most recently, there have been a number of folks who are talking about the post-digital period. So there's this particular argument, there's two kinds of arguments here. One is that the digital isn't so special any longer. So you shouldn't say digital methods, you can just say methods. So this is one argument. And the other argument is that it's becoming increasingly difficult to get web data. The idea of sort of abundant big web data is a bit of a myth. And that has to do with what is referred to as platform lockdown, the fact that social media platforms are allowing researchers less and less access to its data, and particularly Facebook and Instagram have done that, although they have replaced their APIs with particular systems like CrowdTangle, which allow for some data collection but not other data collection. So they've sort of they're kind of structuring the sort of research that researchers can do, or data researchers can do. But I'm going to talk mainly about this third period, which is still, of course, this periodization is really transhistorical. So the web is sometimes still seen as a cyberspace, is sometimes still seen as virtual society, etc. So I'm going to talk about what is referred to as the computational turn. And so I want to get right to an example. What you see here is a map of the US, and you'll be seeing maps of the US, I suppose, quite a lot in the coming days, also colored like this, but the colors here don't signify politics, but rather taste. So what you see here are those states colored purple have higher proportions of the query for sweet potato pie. And this is just before the national feast of Thanksgiving. So where in the US are people querying for this recipe, sweet potato pie? And you see that it's quite southern, macaroni and cheese also southern, sweet potato more Midwest, corn casserole more in the Corn Belt, green beans out west, turkey brine up north, and yams almost exclusively Western. So we're using web data here in some sense to study, let's call it a geography of taste and preference. This particular image, this is from 2014. It shows the same kind of ideas, but instead of trends, so sort of food trends, it shows specificity. So which recipe was searched for most specifically per state, and then you see some very peculiar dishes that some of which I've never heard of, like frog eye salad in Nevada, for example. So this computational turn, or web as data turn, as I said, occurred somewhere around 2007, 2008, and these are the key articles, for one by Duncan Watts called A 21st Century Science, published in Nature, and the other one by David Lazaire and colleagues called Computational Social Science, published in Science, the journal Science in 2009, and they argue that the web has become a space for not just the study of online culture any longer, but the study of culture, or not just for the study of the digital, but for the study of the societal. And that is because there is data where you can, for example, trace or study, let's say, mood, sentiment, etc. Now, this is the big warning that one should always take into account when doing digital methods, or when doing data science, or doing big data research using web data. And it comes from Google Flu Trends. Now, Google Flu Trends was the kind of flagship big data project. With Google Flu Trends, what it did was it took queries about flu and flu-related symptoms, coughing, sneezing, etc. And then on the basis of where these queries were made, so they geolocated the users, so querying the users of search engines, users of Google, querying flu-related symptoms. On that basis, they could tell where flu is at. They could locate incidents of flu. Now, what was interesting about that is that it was a system which was sort of faster, or it anticipated flu better and faster than the traditional ways of doing it. But then something happened in 2012 and 2013, and this is articles that were again published in Nature and Science by Butler and David Lazaire again and colleagues. And the interesting finding was, or the interesting problem was, that Google Flu Trends was overestimating flu by 2 times. And the question is, well, why was it suddenly overestimating flu? Well, this is the major issue. Was it measuring what was happening in the wild, in society, or was it measuring what was happening in media? And what I mean by that is, if you hear on the radio or on TV or by word of mouth that it's flu season, maybe you start searching for flu and flu-related queries, even though you don't have the flu. So this is always the question: what are you measuring when you're using this kind of data? Are you measuring what's happening in the wild, or are you measuring what's happening in media? Okay. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to situate digital methods and compare them to a couple of schools of thought in the digital humanities and the digital social sciences. And I'm going to talk a little bit, let's call it epistemologically. So how is it that digital humanities, digital social sciences, and digital methods know? So how do we know? And I'm going to do that by introducing this sort of 2x2, which situates epistemologically a number of schools of thought in the digital humanities and digital social sciences. And the way I'm situating them is talking about the kind of data they use and kinds of methods they use. So some use digitized data, and others use natively data, so data born online, or online native data, and and some use digitized method, and some use natively digital method. And so this is what I'd like to introduce to you now. I'm going to start with digital humanities and talk about two approaches. The first is cultural analytics. Cultural analytics is something that was coined by Lev Manovich, and what it does, and I'll get to an example, is it uses digitized data. So these are the scanned covers of Time magazine, a tone-setting magazine from the US, and they're in chronological order here. And what you're looking at, what you're studying when you study something like this sort of image wall, is you're studying what he calls style space. So a style space is a space in which one looks at visual changes in similarity, either in a snapshot or over time. And it uses, what the piece of software used here is called image plot. And there are a few of these pieces of software called image sorter. And what they also do is they group images according to formal properties, hue, saturation, etc. So it's in some ways a digitized art history approach where you're looking at the materiality of the images. But what's interesting about Manovich's approach is he argues that it's a form of big data studies where you no longer need periodization because you see continuous change. And you no longer need categorization because you can do continuous description. And I think that this is a good example thereof. So you see the covers of Time magazine here, and you see how you see sort of in some ways continual change. So and you can describe that continual change through without periodizing, without categorizing. The other example that I want to bring up very briefly of this sort of work is this project Selfie City. Selfie City looks again at the formal characteristics of, in this case, photographs. And this was a project where they compared 3,200 images that were tagged with the hashtag selfie across 5 different cities in the world: Moscow, Berlin, Rio, Tokyo, Los Angeles. And what they found was that people were really kind of jovial or smiley, far more so in Rio, and a lot more grim or sad in Moscow. And this is a sort of like a city mood, but it's also a space, but it's also a kind of city mood analysis. The second one is called Culturomics. Culturomics uses the Google Ngram viewer that is shown here. So Culturomics is the study of, it's sort of a lexicographical analysis where you query Ngram, or you query, in fact, all of Google Books' scanned books. And it's in many languages, the best data is in the English language. But basically you query for resonance of particular terms over time to do a kind of longitudinal distant reading type of analysis of culture or knowledge culture. So in this particular case, you see the queries and then compare them, and you see in some ways the rise and fall of particular individuals. Now, what's interesting, and a couple of things that I found interesting about this, and I wrote them down here, is that celebrities are celebrities for increasingly shorter and shorter amount of time. So celebrities used to be celebrities for a much longer period of time than now. Also, they found particular kinds of spelling. So American spelling is taken over from British spelling over time. So these are kind of findings that Culturomics. Now, they use largely digitized data. I mean, the Suffolk City project was an exception, but they largely used digitized data, sort of scanned artworks, books, um, uh, and but they also and they use digitized method. Now, I want to get into the um, sort of e-social sciences or the digital social sciences, so to speak, and talk about two approaches. One is called webometrics. So webometrics, so here is sort of an example. This is a study of natively digital data, so hyperlinks, but then using a digitized method, sort of scientometrics. So what you're looking at here are who links to whom in a particular issue space online. So the blue ones are Armenian NGOs, and the yellow ones are intergovernmental organizations like the UN. So the UN links to the UN. The Armenian NGOs link to the Armenian NGOs. The Armenian NGOs link to the UN, and the UN does not link back. So what you get here is a sort of reputational indicators, or maybe even the politics of association through link analysis. But it's largely an analysis about reputation. The second one is altmetrics. Altmetrics, I don't know if you've ever seen this colorful donut. If you look up particular articles online, you would actually need, I don't have this, you would need a sort of a bookmarklet installed, and then you could see the extent to which particular articles have resonated on social media. So this is an alternative altmetric, sort of an alternative way of looking at the popularity or the relevance of academic work, altmetrics. So again, a reputational measure, but then the reputation there is derived from the online indicators. So now I want to talk about digital methods. So digital methods from the outset has been striving to use both natively digital method as well as natively digital data. And in some ways, it's the study of the natively digital. And what I mean by that, I don't mean native or natively digital in an anthropological or ethnographic sense, but rather I mean in a computing sense. So when something runs native, it means it was written for the operating system, or written in this case for the medium, written for the web, etc. So this is what I mean by natively digital. Now, you can compare natively digital methods, which I'll get to in a second, to digitized ones. So of course, we are very familiar with the numerous online surveys that we come across. There are any number of different kinds of methods that have migrated online that we use. What's interesting about them is they don't necessarily migrate online smoothly. I mean, sampling, for example, has become a bit more difficult because of the difficulty in knowing the population of things online. So how do you know if you have a good Twitter data sample? Well, you don't really know what the population is of all tweets that discusses politics, for example. So the knowability of the population is an issue. But in any case, these are the kinds of methods that have been quote unquote digitized and migrated to the medium. Whereas digital methods are methods that you could think of as sort of like software projects online. And these are methods that are sort of written for the medium or are of the medium, so to speak. And there's a particular kind of way of thinking about digital methods, and it's these 4 steps, basically. You ask yourself, well, what opportunities are available online to do research? And when asking that question, you ask, well, which kinds of objects and data are available? So there are links, there are hashtags, there are likes, there are timestamps, etc. And then you ask yourself, well, how do the dominant devices handle them? So what does Google do with a hyperlink, and what does Twitter do when it has outputs trending topics, for example? And then you say, well, how do we learn from this and repurpose these device methods for not what the platforms are doing, but instead for social and cultural research? And then finally, you ask yourself the question, well, can we ground our findings in the line, or do we have to go offline and triangulate? And when, in that case, is the online the baseline? So these are the sorts of this is the sort of general outlook, or maybe even theory of method, so to speak, of digital methods. So what I'm going to do now for the next half an hour or so is talk about doing digital methods. So how do you do it practically? And there's a bunch of different that we have come up with that I would like to take you through. And I'm going to talk only about social media platforms. So I'm not going to talk. There are digital methods for hyperlink analysis, digital methods for repurposing search engines. There are digital methods for the study of Wikipedia and others. But I'm going to focus today just on social media platforms, and I'm going to focus on the four big ones. So Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We also have methods and software to see the deep vernacular web, as we call it, so Reddit, 4chan, also Telegram and TikTok. We've developed techniques and a scraper to do that, but I'm not going to talk about that today. We have pulled a little bit also in messaging apps and also in app studies more generally. But I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm going to stick with these four major platforms. So Twitter, we have come up with basically three methods for doing Twitter research. And I'll talk about each of these: remote event analysis, treating Twitter as a social issue space, and segmenting and studying a particular audience on Twitter. And I'll talk about how to do that and why it might be interesting to do that. But in order to do that, what I first want to do is situate a little bit these particular approaches in the history of Twitter research. So Twitter originally was arguably thought of as a sort of friend-following medium, or a medium for, let's call it, remote intimacy. And in that particular period, Twitter had the byline or the tag of what you're asked to tweet is the answer to the question, "What are you doing?" And this resulted in a lot of researchers and others finding that Twitter was really banal, like the "what I had for lunch" meeting, or you would study, if you studied it at all, you would study it as a sort of phatic communication space. So a space not of substance, but of social connection. Now, Jack Dorsey, in a couple of articles that were published in the Los Angeles Times in, I think, 2010, 2009, 2010, said that Twitter realized that, the CEO, Twitter realized that it was quite good at events. So it was used at events, and it was good to events. And around that time, they changed their question that they posed to users to "what's happening?" So this is a very, very different Twitter. It's a Twitter that is about following elections, disasters, revolutions, etc. And more recently, Twitter has become, in some ways, a sort of generic data set. Researchers are using Twitter data for studying most everything, and also big things like the mood of a country, or the sort of animal spirits of the stock market, etc. So I just want to show you this brief. So this is the original Twitter sketch. It's sort of interesting. Up until recently, it was on Jack Dorsey's Flickr page. And you see here what it was originally intended, or who it was intended for. So it used a sort of domain hack, stat.us for status, was the original name of it. And you see the defaults here, either I'm in bed or going to the park. So you see it's for a sort of young San Franciscan urbanites, if you will. Now, as I said, around 2009, when they changed the model, Twitter also became implicated in the sort of orange and other revolutions, or the revolutions of the squares. And I think possibly the most well-known one for Twitter, at least, was the Iran election crisis of 2009, and what was then referred to as the Twitter revolution. Subsequently, you see here also tweets about the terrorist attack in Paris with the hashtag Je suis Charlie from 2015. So here are people tweeting about a particular event in Paris. So you can follow the event and its reactions to the event, both on the ground but also in social media. So this is the start of what you could call the inspiration for using Twitter to do remote event analysis. So here's a concrete technique in order to do that. You can create a tweet collection from a single hashtag example, me too, or Je suis Charlie, or other more recent ones. And then what you do is you put them in the order of retweets. So the most retweeted tweets per day in chronological order, as opposed to the reverse chronological order that Twitter gives you. And here you have a technique for what you could call storytelling on Twitter. Twitter as storytelling machine. So this is what we did with the Iran election crisis of 2009, and turned it into a story according to of what happened on the ground and in social media according to Twitter in the 20 days of that crisis. And this is when you boil it down to its essence. This is basically the story that Twitter tells of that period. Studying it as an issue space is another way of doing it. So here there are three things to do when studying Twitter as a social issue space. The first is hashtag analysis. So hashtags are quite often sort of either events or social issues or slogans. And so when thinking about an issue, social issue, you can see which hashtags are being used. You can also subsequently study who's being mentioned. So I mean, you can study who's is speaking as well. So that would be a sort of a metric for sort of the most vocal actor. But the one who's mentioned the most, you could call the sort of the dominant voice. And the third one is to do URL analysis, which shows content. Now, this is one particular recipe for doing this. You could do this in a number of ways, but this one is quite effective. So in terms of the hashtag analysis, these are all hashtags, but this is then they're ranked by frequency in the global health space. And so what you see is a kind of hierarchy of issues according to the global health community. So HIV being the top one. This was in I think 2017. And the dominant voice, again, this is gets mentioned the most in that space, and so you see the Gates Foundation is, so you get a sort of hierarchy again of voices. So who's most dominant, who gets listened to the most. And then the URL analysis, this is from the 2016 US presidential elections, and there are two tweet collections here. One are Trump supporters, and the other one is Hillary supporters, Hillary Clinton supporters. And then it's which sources are referenced in Trump supporter tweets and which sources are referenced in Hillary Clinton supporter tweets. And then this is a sort of classic, let's call it the polarization of media study, where you see that the Hillary supporters have a particular, very specific media consumption patterns, and as well as do the Trump supporters. And there's very few sources that are shared by the two. You'll also notice that the Trump supporters, I don't know if you can sort of interpret some of those sources there, but like Breitbart and InfoWars and the Gateway Pundit, they're quite extreme voices, whereas you don't really have that extremism on the Hillary side. Yeah, segmented audience. So Twitter doesn't really want you to do this. Well, at least it doesn't want governments to do this. So it's basically a means by which you can find a group or a movement. So this is how you do it. And when I say they don't want you to do it, they don't want you to do it for surveillance purposes, but as an academic researcher, I think it's legitimate. So what we did here is we were interested in mapping the alt-right on Twitter. Before a lot of these people were deplatformed from Twitter. But when we did this, I think it was 2017 or 2018, they were still online. And so what we did is we took an expert list of major alt-right actors, and we looked at who mentions them. So who mentions them? So if you mentioned all 8 of them, and look at this, there's Trump's on here. If you mentioned all 8 of them, this is a kind of core audience, if you will, of the alt-right. And then this one is mentioned by 7 of them, mentions 6 of them, mentions 5 of them, mentions 4 of them. So you can see here that you can kind of map the audience of the alt-right. Yeah, finally, I mean, there are other techniques as well, but I just want to give you some. Finally, this one is for studying like a political leader. And I don't know if you've ever seen this piece of data journalism in the New York Times. It's quite humorous. It's the 500. This was in 2019. The number has probably gone up by now. But anyway, the 567 people, places, and things Donald Trump has insulted on Twitter, a complete list. And so you see, for example, how he talks about Hillary Clinton, or you see how he talks about the mainstream media, etc. So this is a kind of data journalistic approach to the study of a politician's or a set of politicians. This is just a single politician tweets. You can be a bit more academic about it. So this is these are the analysis of the sets of tweets by the populist party leader in the Netherlands, Geert Wilders. And the question here was, to what extent could we call Geert Wilders a part of the new right or the alt-right, where the alt-right has a particular set of grievances or issues? And then you categorize the tweets. And you can do this qualitatively, or you can try to do it quantitatively with sort of like natural language processing, things like this, in order to characterize the extent to which this particular populist leader could be considered a member or have the sympathies of the new right or the alternative right. Okay, I want to get to Facebook. So Facebook is interesting as well for how it has evolved. I mean, I'll go through these are the techniques that I'm going to introduce to you, sort of digital methods, if you will, and each corresponds to a particular period, like the Twitter one, but this is even more specific. Of each of these periods. So Facebook, I mean, Facebook was originally studied as a space where one presents oneself, where one writes oneself into being. And there was a lot of work also on sort of social network analyses, largely, where one would analyze the extent to which one's friends had things in preferences or interests in common, right? Because you could study the profile of a set of friends, and in the profile lists interests like favorite books, favorite movies, etc. So this was one, and there were a number of studies that then came under fire for their ethics, and I'll talk about that now. But there are also two other sort of periods that I thought of as sort of after the sort of ethics kind of crisis, and after Facebook made it more difficult to study friends, so they changed their API, so you could only study pages of Facebook and groups. So this was around 2011. A lot of the research then was about these pages and groups, and I'll talk about that. And finally, most recently, and I think that we may have forgotten these other Facebooks from the past just because of how Facebook now is considered a kind of meme machine or fake news machine or disinformation. So all the influence campaigning going on, and all the efforts by Facebook to moderate the content. I should actually have this on the slide as well. So the study of content moderation on Facebook. But let's just go back for a second to the early days. I don't know if you have seen the movie The Social Network. If you did, you will have seen an actor playing Sean Parker. Now, Sean Parker is quite a famous person in the history of the internet, and he is also one of the early shareholders in Facebook and made quite some money. He also told Mark Zuckerberg that the name The Facebook, this was the famous moment in the movie, is the Facebook is lame. You should just call it Facebook. So Facebook.com, not The Facebook. In any case, you see this is a very early this is an early profile, and you see here that you have you have preferences listed, favorite books, movies, etc. You also have political views, and what's interesting is that both political views, but you don't see it here. But also it was just after this there was added religion as well. So politics and religion. So you could also profile in that way. You see that this kind of like half dating site, even like they're interested in women, looking for random play. So this is a sort of example of a profile, and these would be studied. And the technique that we came up with to study social media profiles we called post demographics, and this is looking at the profiles, the interest of a set of friends of, in this case, politicians. So we did this when the presidential election was between Obama and McCain. And we took their top friends and we looked at their interests and we aggregated them. So you can see, for example, Obama's friends liked what listed as preferences: The Daily Show, Lost Heroes, whereas McCain's friends listed Family Guy, Project Runway, America's Next Top Model, CSI, Desperate Housewives. See, you can begin to study like politics in media. You can begin to profile supporters. You can also profile, like you can also study the relationships between interests. So if you listed chess, what else would you be interested in? So these are sets of people, huh? So those who had chess in their profile, what else did they have? And these are the top ones. So they also interested in the TV show Smallville, and their heroes are Batman, etc. Now, something happened around 2008, 2009, 2010 in this period where people's study profiles came under fire. And there was this particular one here, this study here, where a social network analysis resulted in another researcher being able to kind of reverse engineer it and find out who the supposed anonymous subjects were. And so right around this time also Facebook changed its API so you could no longer scrape, or you could no longer poll, get the data of friends and their interests. And this is where the Cambridge Analytica scandal comes in as well. It was later, but what Cambridge Analytica scandal was about was being able to harvest the data of friends using the Facebook API. Now, in this second period, you have the study of pages, as I said, and this is one of the most famous pages. This is We Are All Khaled Zaid, the Egyptian Revolution of 2011. And this is an example of a page which one studies, or a set of pages, and the technique that we've developed. There are a couple of pages can like other pages, so you can do a sort of network analysis. And this is the new right in Europe. This was in like 2013, 2014. So these are the pages that like other pages. At the time, and this is kind of interesting, you could also get the administrators' names of the pages, and you could do a kind of network analysis showing which administrators were in which others' groups. So this is a groups analysis, and so this is a kind of you can see at a glance the sort of the new right and the extent which of the page administrators, or the new leaders, so to speak, are central and which ones are more peripheral. The other thing is page analysis is what we call networked content analysis. And this is something that one can still do, and you can also do interlight page analysis. The piece of software that you can do this with nowadays still is called FacePager. We didn't build that piece of software. Some colleagues did. Our software, NetViz, was shut down by Facebook, like many other pieces of software, like Netlytics and others. When Facebook discontinued its Pages API for most every researcher, apart from the researchers that run this piece of software called FacePager. So with network content analysis, you look at which, so I should apologize for this if this is kind of slightly shocking pictures, but this is the image, or the post, but it's an image, that was most engaged with, that is to say, most liked or shared or commented upon by a set of pages around what's called Stop Islamization. This is a sort of right-wing, far-right extremist set of pages on Facebook. And so this was the one that's most engaged with. So you study most engaged with content. And what we found is that the most engaged with content on Facebook tends to be memes. And memes are interesting object of study. There's a nice book written by Limor Schiffman on memes and other analyses. So memes, of course, are image macros, but they're more than image macros. They are a content collection. So the difference between a meme and a meme is multiple and viral is single. So memes are sort of content collection that people sort of add to with awareness of other memes. So one adds to a meme. So memes are additive. You could say that you add to them to add to the sort of comprehension, additive comprehension. So these are for the first two periods. So the first one is the study of preference. Second one is study engagement. Now the third one is more recent, and this is an article that I just published like 2 days ago in the Harvard Misinformation Review, and it is on what I call sort of fake news ontologies. So comparing definitions of fake news that are from the platform versus journalistic definitions. And you can see there's a tension between the two. But first, I want to just talk about this image here. So this is, in some ways, what I would say is the birth of the fake news crisis. This is in the run-up to the 2016 elections. There was a newspaper article in BuzzFeed News by Craig Silverman where he published this graphic and found so-called fake news was outperforming mainstream news on Facebook just before the election in the US in 2016. Now what's interesting is that this was quite shocking in some ways, that this would be the case, that there would be so much of it, but that it also would be engaged with so much. But what I find interesting about this is how Silverman defines fake news. So fake news here, it's on the bottom of the slide, is defined as imposter sites, so sites saying they're one thing but they're really another, conspiracy sites or pages, but hyper-partisan ones. Now these are kind of like, let's call it extreme news sites. And so if you use the same definition, so we redid his study for 2020, and if you use the same definition as he did, the problem, the fake news problem on Facebook has worsened. So there are, I mean, mainstream news is outperforming fake news, and this is only in the early period, so in the run-up to the elections. This is only in March of 2020. So we compared his March 2016 data with our March 2020 data, and we found that the problem has worsened. However, if you use a more narrow definition of fake news, and this is the definition largely used by the platforms themselves, by Facebook, they use the term false news, so they don't consider hyper-partisan to be false, only imposter and hoax and conspiracy. Then the problem gets much smaller. So this is what you could call the politics of demarcation, and also it has implications for the politicization of so-called fake news. So it's interesting that we looked at which the politics of the sources, comparing them. So conservative hyper-partisan or partisan sources were engaged with far more than progressive ones. So if you were to eliminate, or if you were to call hyper-partisan conservative sources problematic or fake, you could easily see why they would say that they're being censored. So it's interesting to sort of demonstrate why it is empirically that fake news or problematic information online is becoming politicized. So you could say that if you classify fake news in a more narrow fashion, you could perhaps depoliticize the. This is a this is a tricky subject, um, but it also implies a politics of demarcation. So how you define ontologically what fake news is or what problematic information um, is a way of making Facebook either more or less blameworthy, more or less culpable. Instagram. Um, so I think Instagram also has undergone a transformation in its study over the years. So Instagram originally and still is thought of as a kind of selfie space. But it also became politicized, where hashtags were like, Black Lives Matter, no, Blue Lives Matter. So you had antagonistic hashtags, antagonistic hashtag publics on Instagram. And I think most recently, I think we're seeing the study a lot more of what you could call artificial amplification. So I want to just show you techniques for some of these. So this is the first Instagram post ever. So this is Kevin Systrom. It's a sort of family selfie. That's his girlfriend's foot and his dog. So this is a sort of, the beginnings of Instagram. I showed you this before. This is the study of selfies academically. So then we're studying the formal characteristics of the faces. And drawing and making inferences about the mood or sentiment of the place where these selfies were taken, the cities. I mentioned before antagonistic hashtag and antagonistic hashtag publics, the Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, etc. So here the technique is to study hashtag antagonism by comparing what you could call the program and the anti-program. So these are the notions that are used originally by Bruno Latour. So in the 2015 U.S. Supreme Court same-sex decision, same-sex marriage decision, the hashtag that circulated right afterwards was "Love Wins," and then quite quickly thereafter, the reactionary hashtag appeared, "Love Loses," as well as "Jesus Wins." Now, if you look at, you can look at that in terms of their spread, and in terms of these are filters. This is kind of like quote unquote filter activism. Here is the Jesus Wins, but you can geolocate the programs and the anti-programs. So in some ways, I mean, the Jesus Wins and Love Loses, the anti-program, you are in some sense geolocating hate, because Instagram posts, the things that can be analyzed are hashtags as well as geolocations. Those are the data points that are given to you. So you can geolocate antagonistic hashtag publics. These are follower ecologies on Instagram. This is the more politicized Instagram in the current period, and what you see here is the mapping of follower ecologies. This is the political follower ecologies in the Netherlands, and what we found here is a very distinctive sort of far right media ecology emerging on Instagram. And this is what people are studying increasingly these days, and that is artificial amplification, or more simply fake followers. So this is a analysis of a set of politicians, a set of media organizations, and the percentage of fake followers according to Hype Auditor. This is a at the time was a freely available tool, but what's interesting is also the definition of fake, and the difference different tools and different techniques have when declaring something fake, and that's also an interesting study in itself. YouTube, YouTube is quite generous in its data provision. Its API gives you quite a lot of data. I mean, it is also shrinking like the other ones, but let's maybe say shrinking less of the amount of data available. And the kinds of analyses one can do have to do with what comes out of YouTube on the interface. So you get recommendations on YouTube, so you can study that. You can search YouTube, so you can study search results. On YouTube, channels can subscribe to other channels, so you can do a network analysis, channel network analysis. And also, I just wanted to add one about content moderation. I mean, a lot of content is being taken down from all these platforms, and the question is, well, how can you reconstruct what's been taken down and its significance? So I want to start by giving a sort of potted history, if you will, of YouTube studies. I mean, YouTube originally was thought of as a sort of amateur production space. The term that circulated in internet studies at the time was the study of participatory culture. It subsequently, quote unquote, commercialized, and we saw the rise also of, during the commercialization phase, of the YouTuber, the micro celebrity, also the extreme celebrities, making money off of YouTube. And finally, most recently, we saw the concern of what is referred to as the rabbit hole effect, and so the recommendation system would give more extreme videos so that you would keep watching, or binge watching, and so we had interrogations of the recommendations. So this is from the Wayback Machine of the Internet Archive. This is the earliest interface image that there is of YouTube. This is from 2005. You can see, in fact, that originally it was a dating site. So you would take videos of yourself. So this is the idea of broadcast yourself, YouTube's original slogan. So you would take videos of yourself and then post them, and then you would it was something, but that didn't last very long. It became this sort of interesting commercial site. I mean, it became a commercial site in a variety of ways. One way was that there was a major lawsuit by a big media company, legacy media company, Viacom, against YouTube because of all of the pirated videos on YouTube. And so so YouTube developed a content matching system called Content ID, and this allowed YouTube to identify which videos from Viacom were being uploaded, but also provided an opportunity to use that, for others to use that particular tool to protect their own content. So it commercialized in that sense, but also commercialized with the growth of the metrics. So how subscriber counts, view counts, and of course the ratings as well. And so you could see the extent to which one had become a YouTuber and also was able to monetize the content. And I think most recently we've been seeing a lot of this. So that a lot of content is being removed, deplatformed, canceled. These are some of the terms that are being used. And so we've developed some means to study each of those things. So first, you can study the outputs of YouTube search. So these are searches for Syrian war. This is in the period, I think it was 2018. And you can see in this sort of rank flow that there are some videos that kind of jump up and down over time. And this is what people refer to as a sort of excitable algorithm. When there's a major event in the Syrian war, these authors found that the videos at the top become far more extreme. And then when there's quiet in that war, the videos become more like news or expert. So one can study sort of, let's call it, hierarchies of credibility generated by an excitable algorithm. You can create networks. So as I said, channels can subscribe to other channels. Channels can also feature other channels. And so here, this is a subscription network. These are the alt-right, so who subscribes to whom. And there's also a network visualization of who features whom. It's interesting, when you look at the features networks, those are like business relationships. And this is, well, I mean, you can also do channel subscription networks. So this is an example of that. So, and you know, in this particular case, we were studying the Dutch media landscape, and on the upper left-hand side, we found a very specific sort of far-right cluster, a sort of far-right media ecology that was emerging, which we found interesting to study. And then finally, to study the politics of deletion, it was this is actually from 4chan. So on 4chan, a particular board, the poll board, politically incorrect board on 4chan, they refer to a lot of YouTube videos. It's now thought of as a kind of the new print in a particular, or YouTube as a news source. And in this particular project, what they did was they were looking at which videos were still available on YouTube. And this is the set of videos that were referenced and then you can see how many of them were taken down. I think something like 3 months later, on the 15th, and then on the 6th of June. No, sorry, I thought I had another slide there. And then on the 6th of June, there's even fewer of them. And the authors look into so here you know which ones you have that info. You know which ones were still available, and then later which ones were deleted. So you can see what's been deleted, and you can begin to inquire into why they've been deleted, or the legitimacy of the deletion, or in fact the politics of deletion. Okay, so what I've done today took a little bit longer than I expected, but what I did is to situate digital methods first historically, so as a part of the kind of computational turn of the web as data turn, and then talked about how digital methods are in some ways distinctive, although they share quite a lot of qualities with the digital humanities and digital social sciences, but that they are specifically the study of the quote-unquote natively digital. And then I showed you, in some sense, the practice of doing digital methods. That's it. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll turn the floor back to the chair.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much for your interesting conference. A lot of people asking in the chat for your book and for the DMI school. Total success, total success. We have a question in the chat. I don't know if you can see. Daniela Jaramillo is asking in the chat a very interesting question. can you read it? Or maybe Daniela, you want to ask directly?
Let me try to find the chat.
I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah. Hi, Dr. Rogers.
Hi.
How are you? Yeah, I've seen you before. I was in your summer methods school, which I enjoyed a lot.
Great. Oh, good.
So, well, my question is that it's about the issue of research ethics. In a few days ago, Facebook, as you probably know, contacted some new NYU researchers about blocking them from accessing data from Facebook. So they had developed a tool which Facebook users, could give them access to their own data, and this was data related to their consumption of political ads. And Facebook has sent a letter, with lawyers, a lawsuit, to block them from collecting this data. So this is a question that, of course, it's always applicable, but this just shows how they are moving forward in more strict ways to block researchers from accessing data. And what does this mean for us as PhD students who have based our research studies on social media data and having access to it? How can we approach this, and what would be your thoughts on this?
Thanks so much for the interesting question. So I have a lot of thoughts about this. I've in fact sort of developed a whole lecture about it. So I won't get too deep into it, but I will make sort of 3 points. So the first point is that this is something that we wrote up in an article with Tommaso Venturini that was published in the journal Digital Journalism, I think in 2019. And what we argued there was that there are alternatives, right? So there's digital ethnography, there's small data studies, etc., and they're all outlined in that particular piece. However, there is also I think what's interesting to study is, of course, what Facebook is doing to research, right? So that's in some sense Facebook critique. That's different, right? And this is something that I also wrote about. It was called Social Media Research After the Fake News Debacle. It was an article that I published in I think 2019, and that lays out the kind of the sort of Facebook research critique, what Facebook is doing to researchers with its platform Lockdown. Now, the third thing is you can still do data analysis on the Pages API with a piece of software called FacePager. I mentioned that in the lecture. There are 2. I mean, this is not being practical, but maybe everyone who's interested in doing Facebook research will find this interesting. There are 2 YouTube videos by Michael Chan, C-H-A-N, from the Chinese University of Hong Kong, where he explains how you use FacePager. I highly recommend those, and also the tool itself. So you can do the networked content analysis that I mentioned. So that's studying most engaged with content on pages. Facebook doesn't want you to do that, right? So Facebook, and this is the 4th point, Facebook wants you to use CrowdTangle. Now, CrowdTangle is an interesting tool. It's originally designed for people in marketing who want to study Facebook data, but they've now opened it up to academic researchers for free, and they've opened it up. They've been quite generous, especially during the pandemic, for those who want to study the infodemic. So there's the 4th option. Now, what's interesting is the politics of Facebook research question, right? And that is that if you want to do engagement analysis of pages, so you want to see which posts animate the alt-right, for example. Okay, so what animates them? So which posts get liked the most, or liked, shared, commented upon, reacted to? So that's kind of an impact measure. But if you just take like or share, you could think of it as more than an impact measure. So if you want to do that work, you can't do it on CrowdTangle. It's very interesting. So what you can do on CrowdTangle is you can only study the engagement of web URL, not Facebook pages. So it's as if they kind of push away the blame, right? And it's a subtle point, but it's a good distinction. So those are the four things you can do, and of course we can spend a lot more time on the Facebook critique. I didn't spend so much time on it right now, but I think that's also very interesting to do.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniela. I don't know if any other question. Okay, I have a question. I have a question. Please, Richard, which is the main difference between digitized and native methods? Which is the main point that the social sciences methodologies had not to be perfectly suitable for internet? And maybe, sorry, maybe I'm asking for too much abstraction. I don't know, but I don't know if you can tell us something about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. So I don't mean these distinctions to be absolute, and I also don't mean to be absolutist, right? So there's a lot of blurriness between them, especially with respect to the difference between digitized method and natively digital method, because all of the methods that are natively digital come from somewhere, right? But the general idea of this particular point was to first and foremost to try to address the problem of volatility and instability of the internet. So this is exactly what Daniela was talking about. And she's like, well, what do you do when your object of study changes, or when suddenly it doesn't give you the data that it used to give you? And my answer to that was that you try to follow the medium. Of course, you don't follow it blindly; you follow it critically. So there have been some critiques of digital methods, which have argued that, and this is a completely different lecture, but that have argued that digital methods are kind of uncritically sort of following the platforms instead of critiquing them. But in any case, digital methods were kind of devised to deal with the ephemerality and instability problem. So instead of having these expectations of a particular kind of coming to the internet with a lot of baggage already, no, you think of what's available on the internet to study, and then you think about, well, how can I sort of repurpose this data or these techniques? What can I do with these metrics? What can I do with likes? What can I do with shares? Can I turn them into something that's of intellectual interest or for social research? So this is the result of these sorts of distinctions, or this is maybe both the result as well as the origins.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other question by the chat or by directly?
And by the way, you can pose a question in Spanish, and we can also translate it. I mean, I don't speak Spanish, but just to lower the barrier.
Y podéis preguntar si queréis en español e intentamos traducirlo. Okay. No question. Oh, thank you, Richard, for sharing with us all the possibilities and indicators. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And very interesting your session, your lecture, and we will have you will have notice from us because we have to ask you much more.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I'm so sorry I couldn't be with you. Obviously, we know why, but next time, and I really enjoyed it, and hopefully I'll get to engage with you again. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Thank you very much. See you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.